The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership.
Leaders who advocate for and actually put into practice this more caring and compassionate way can actually make a difference and make it happen. And so in other words, these ideas are simple. Putting them into practice is simple, but none of us actually believe that we can do it and it's actually going to make a change. But what Barry-Wehmiller, through Bob's discussion, helped the students realize is that it really is as easy and as possible as enacting it moment to moment.
I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman often says that early in his career, he took management classes, got a management degree, got a job in management, and what did he do? He tried to manage people. He was never taught to inspire. He was never taught to care. But he was taught that success is money, power, and position. So if you want to change the way people lead, maybe you should go to the source of where they're taught to lead. Business schools. Maybe the way we teach people to lead should change. Christopher Reina is the founding and executive director of the Institute for Transformative Leadership and an associate professor in the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship at Virginia Commonwealth University. Chris came into our orbit at Barry-Wehmiller a number of years ago in the formative stages of what would become the Humanistic Leadership Academy, an effort we helped found, which has the mission to transform business education to create leaders who honor individual dignity, demonstrate the courage to care for others, and work towards shared well-being on a healthy planet. Our relationship with Chris blossomed into a partnership at VCU, spearheaded by our Director of Outreach, Brian Wellinghoff. Brian is leading our external efforts at Barry-Wehmiller to bring truly human leadership into the educational space. Brian is the executive in residence at VCU. Chris has also recently published a paper titled Humanistic Organizing, the Transformative Force of Mindful Organizational Communication. It lays out a framework for business to transform into more people-centered organizations where individuals feel valued and a strong sense of belonging. And it features Barry-Wehmiller in one of its case studies. On this podcast, we're bringing Chris and Brian together to talk about the partnership at VCU to transform the way leadership is taught. We'll hear about what they're doing and the effect it's had on students. We're going to bring Brian in a little bit later, but we're going to start things off with Chris talking about his recently published paper.
My colleagues and I were very pleased to recently publish a paper in Academy of Management Review, which is often viewed as one of the premier journals in the field of management. It's a theory paper, meaning that the ideas in the paper are plausible ways in which we can move forward in studying how organizations operate and organize. And so it's a what-if perspective to some extent. There's no empirical data, but this was actually a very unique take on an Academy of Management Review paper because indeed we did actually utilize some data from interviews from Brian and from others at Barry-Wehmiller, and also from the organizational leaders from another organization in New York City. And the idea with this paper was, how do we take something like mindfulness, which is very helpful as a tool in so many ways to help individuals manage their stress and to reorient their mindsets toward a more careful response to a situation rather than a reaction. And so the literature has been quite replete in the last 10 to 15 years about the benefits of mindfulness. Indeed, it's even a more of a household name now than it ever was before. And yet, sort of mindfulness, as we articulate in the paper, has its limits. And as we encounter a world and a society in which we're so interconnected all the time, right? We can't just think about the individuals and help individuals. We have to help the system. We have to think broader. And so individuals absolutely make up a larger system, and yet the system itself has to change and ebb and flow to bring about a more compassionate world. So while mindfulness can help individuals live out more compassion day to day, how are we thinking about organizing, the very act of organizing? If you think about an organization, it is a set of people that are organized in certain ways to accomplish certain things. And so that is really this idea of organizing is implicit in organizations. And if we want to create organizations in which people can thrive and flourish and have high levels of well-being and treat each other with compassion and care, we can help the individuals, we can help the teams, but we also have to rethink the teams themselves and the organizations themselves. And so there's many papers that have articulated ideas like this, but with the construct and idea of mindfulness, it was pretty novel to think about it as something that goes beyond the individual, him or herself, and really impacts the way the system itself organizes. And so to make it kind of short and sweet, we just say, mindfulness can be a really powerful tool, and it's about how we pay attention. What do we pay attention to? What do we give value to? And what? So what do we pay attention to? And then how do we pay attention with compassion, with care, etc.? But there also has to be a larger framework that we're operating from. Maybe it's do no harm. Maybe it is increase well-being. Maybe it is live in a way that doesn't impact the system negatively, but there has to be some sort of ethical framework that is operating. So that's component one. Then mindfulness helps direct how we pay attention and what we pay attention to according to that ethical framework. So that's component number two. And then component number three is really this idea of combining the other two so that this underlying wisdom emerges of well-being, of care, of not harming others. And so together, these three components can fundamentally reshape what we say in organizations, how we say it, what rules we make, how we reinforce rules, how we talk about expectations and live out culture, and how we show people how we live out culture and live out expectations. And so that conversation is what my coworkers, colleagues, and I wanted to reorient. It's not just the individual, but it's the system. And then, as you may think, Barry-Wehmiller provided such an important case study in documenting what that can look like. So we used and spotlighted Barry-Wehmiller in the sense that your organization wasn't always deeply humanistic. Perhaps at one time before, it was deeply economistic, and it was about performance, and that was the shining star. And then at some point, Bob Chapman, through his leadership, through reimagining and infusing the organization with humanism and more compassion, it became an organization that lives out people and performance and harmony. And so we track and give examples of sort of the pre-humanistic approach and the post-humanistic approach to show that transition. And so it's really powerful as we kind of articulated and gave name to how and what Bob Chapman and other leaders in the organization made happen in order to achieve that transition. So that was a little bit about that paper. And it's unique because, again, it's pushing the boundaries of systemic change and individual change. So that's one contribution. And secondly, it's really practical in the sense that we're giving an approach to reorganizing organizations to make them more humanistic in a way that's a bit more practical than oftentimes is seen in a theoretical journal. And then maybe the third distinction is that we actually use anecdotal evidence. We use words and phrases and processes and procedures from Barry-Wehmiller to help the reader understand what does it actually look like to live out wisdom, or what are the ethical ways in which Barry-Wehmiller made decisions about layoffs, for example. And then how does CEO Bob Chapman and Brian Wellinghoff and others in the organization each day choose what to focus on as far as their attention, and what does that mean with regard to people and performance and harmony. So it really gives a way that we can move toward more caring and compassionate organizations, and it shows how an actual organization is doing this day to day.
Talk to us about the Institute for Transformative Leadership at VCU and how that all got started and how you became a part of it.
As far as sort of teaching expertise, what I love and get excited about is leadership and mindfulness and sort of emotions at work. Like, how do we lead in ways that have folks live into their deep levels of engagement and feel positive emotions. So there's some of the questions that I ask in my research and then also bring into my teaching, mostly in the MBA classroom and teaching leadership. And then with regard to the Institute for Transformative Leadership, it is about 1.5 years old now, and it is an institute that really seeks to help leaders kind of reach their highest potential in leadership, and in doing so in ways that is deeply compassionate and caring, and also to sort of bring that same way of thinking about leadership, this very human approach to leadership, also to the MBA classroom and the teaching and the MBA program. And so it's really the same three things that universities do. We research, we teach, and we provide larger service to the institution as well as the world. And so I think the Institute for Transformative Leadership does all of those things by bringing more compassionate and caring leadership to our teaching and the way we show up for students, for the very content that we teach the students. Also in my research and in the research that the collaborators and I do together, we seek to bring about more transformative and humanistic leadership. And then sort of on the service piece is how do we bring that, infuse that into our organizations, our nonprofits, VCU itself, and how do we share that with other institutions so they can continue this growth process of more humanistic leadership. There's so many areas in a university in the world, if you will, in which folks are talking about leadership. And it's certainly not something that's owned by the business discipline or the educational discipline or something that happens in corporate environments. Leadership is really kind of this art and science of how we show up in connection with other humans in order to achieve results and to achieve kind of productivity and efficiency and whatever we're looking at, but it's like we do it with people in mind. And so what I really wanted for the Institute to be is a place where expertise and relationships kind of come together across the VCU enterprise, but more importantly, across sort of relationships that go beyond the boundaries of education, beyond VCU, and bring folks together in a way to have deep conversations, and then to bring that connection that ensues from those deep connections to bear in the world to improve leadership. And so, for example, we have folks at VCU in the space of education, the School of Medicine and Dentistry, social work, School of Business, the Office of the Provost. We have deep connections and collaborations with many folks from Barry-Wehmiller and other organizations. And so it's this idea of how do we bring all of these resources together to have a common language and a common purpose for leadership. And that's helping folks live into being more compassionate and caring and to build that capacity. So it's really this place for it all to come together and to break down barriers and silos that often organizations have and higher education is also not immune to.
Do you feel that approach is something unique to VCU at this point, or do you see other universities kind of using the same model or getting on board with this?
It's a good question. I think many years I've heard conversation around breaking down barriers, around more collaboration, around more cross-disciplinary scholarship. And so I think, when I worked in the corporate world, we talked about that. In my years in academia, we've talked about that. Previous school before VCU, we talked about that. So, I'd like to say simultaneously, a lot of places are having these conversations. However, I think the conversation sometimes doesn't go as far as bringing about meaningful change, because in the end, it's really hard to do this, to really collaborate, to think about the incentives that get everyone aligned, to think about how do we actually create and change curriculum. And if we do so, what implications does the curriculum have for the number of students perhaps that elect a class or a major, or which school do they study in, education or business, for example. And so what I'm hopeful of is our work at VCU in partnership with Barry-Wehmiller. It's about continuing to push the bounds of breaking down those barriers and showing the success that it can bring about. So I don't think VCU is unique, certainly, in having the conversations. I think we are in deeply powerful ways pushing both the breadth and the depth of doing it in practice. And that's for sure for me to say that we have a long way to go, but I'm proud of our progress so far.
How did you get connected with Barry-Wehmiller, and how did Barry-Wehmiller become involved in this effort?
It was through this same idea of deep collaboration across, universities. Oftentimes, scholars perhaps publish with folks from other universities, but, it happens to be like who went to which grad school, and maybe we studied together, and then someone went to a different school, and then that's why we're collaborators. But I think in this case, it was about folks coming together in a unique way to talk about leadership being this art and science of connecting deeply with others. And so I don't remember exactly how I made the initial connection, but what I found was colleagues at Fordham University really caring about the same ideas that I did about how do we transform the way we teach, the way we think, the way we research. And so that series of conversations led me to be deeply connected with scholars and teachers from Fordham University. And it was through those connections and deep relationship that I was able to also connect with Barry-Wehmiller, because they had ongoing partnerships in this journey to fundamentally think differently about education, to think differently about some of the norms that we have and the way that we teach, and to really think about doing it better. And so I guess, short answer is a series of deep conversations and connections with individuals that led to, I say, a critical mass of folks that were doing work in this realm. And those connections led me to the vision and exciting buzz that Bob Chapman brings to his leadership, and this idea that, it's about people and profit. And I was really intrigued by that. And I think the scholars and colleagues that I was with also were deeply intrigued with that idea. So through relationships, I met Bob and went to Phillips, met Brian, and went through what I would call a very transformative experience, one that was unique in how it happened, although I think many of us in the room had felt many glimmers of it before, and we had changed our classrooms and we were researching these topics, but it was so amazing to kind of come together, be in a place where we could connect deeply with others, and then see an organization and its top leadership advocate also for so many of the ideas that we had researched and that we were seeking to restructure our classrooms to live into. And so it just felt like this perfect coming together of ideas, people, and the passion to change the world.
Brian, how would you answer that in your perspective, how the connection was made? And
it's been such a natural connection with Chris from the very beginning, but I think there were two critical events that really brought that forward. The first, as Chris mentioned, was his trip up to Phillips, Wisconsin. For those that may not know, Phillips is our showcase facility for visitors and guests. We employ roughly 500 people in a town of 1,500 in the lovely Northwoods of Wisconsin. And it's not just a great facility, but it's got some retreat facilities and meeting rooms there. And we produce a whole experience. And Chris was alongside other great researchers and academics, but his passion, his engagement, and his commitment stood out from the very beginning. And we were honored that he responded very strongly to the people that he met, the messages that we shared, and especially the fact that there was practical implementation of these ideas, that it wasn't just a theory, that had actually been implemented in a variety of places. And so as a follow-on, he invited Bob Chapman and myself to visit VCU and meet with others there, which led to another significant event. It was essentially the public launch of the Institute for Transformative Leadership. And what I want to tell everybody about that is it was great. Bob Chapman spoke, Chris spoke. There was a great panel of leaders across the organization. And so I think the key element of that was that it wasn't just the business school or one professor or one center. The event was truly a cross-campus engagement with the support of the provost, with the support of the president, that was really intriguing. But the thing that really deeply sold me on an engagement with Chris is Chris made special attention to make sure that his parents and partner were there to see his presentation and be part of that day. And I think that just states a lot about, it's not just the ideas that help bring forward a truly human leadership perspective, but it's who we are. It's our very essence and being. And Chris is someone who leads out front with that, which is so powerful. And it's such an example to other academics, certainly people across campus, but even beyond.
You know, Chris, you were talking earlier about kind of bringing all these cross-disciplinary groups together as informing the Institute. And, you know, Barry-Wehmiller would be an outside group to bring into all this. Could you talk a little bit about what the benefits of the partnership have been so far?
And I'd love to hear Brian's perspective, but one of the advantages I think VCU brings is this breadth that the system has that we can partner with. So ongoing conversations with training physicians who face patients in care and compassion is a conversation that a VCU, a current conversation that VCU and Barry-Wehmiller are having. How to retool and reimagine a more humanistic, transformative MBA experience is a conversation that Barry-Wehmiller and VCU can have. Fundamentally rethinking the student experience for over 30,000 students is a conversation that Barry-Wehmiller and VCU can have because of our diverse ways in which we impact the community. So I think there's some real breadth that VCU can bring. And of course, in that breadth, a lot of complexity, but therein lies one of the main advantages and things that I'm so thankful for is Barry-Wehmiller can bring processes, can bring structures, can bring so many frameworks that you all use, and you can bring that to help us to navigate some of the intricacies of our diverse and sometimes disparate ways of approaching things, because each school has its own thing. Maybe we don't have a common language all the time or a common structure. And so what I've seen, you know, one of the huge values of this collaboration is you all leveraging your resources and tools to help us navigate some of our intricacies.
Brent, you asked, what's made this partnership so rich and what potential do we see going forward? Chris mentioned before that it's hard to do these things. It's hard to change curriculum and mindsets from before. And while at some level I agree, I also want to offer the perspective that there's some things that aren't hard. They're just not that common. What does this really require? It requires the ability to reflect on what we've done and look for improvement. It requires collaboration. And it requires the ability to be innovative and try some things that are different from before. And we found not just Chris, but all of his colleagues at VCU have those three critical qualities. And they're critical qualities for growth and partnership anywhere. That it's a very reflective organization that's always looking to be better. That they're open to industry collaboration with other universities, collaboration across the different units in their own university, as Chris mentioned, and then also that innovative mindset, the willingness to just try some things. A great professor at VCU saw a workshop that I facilitated and literally 2 days later was utilizing one of the workshop activities in her class with undergraduate students, and it went extraordinarily well. That willingness to innovate and try, I think, is a great aspect of everybody that I've met at VCU and a key richness of the partnership. And that's why the sky is the limit in collaboration going forward. And so I truly believe that something special is happening at VCU with Chris's leadership, with the leadership of others and all parts of the organization. It is a unique, urban, innovative, inclusive experience at VCU that is a rich source of creativity and collaboration that is expressed not just in the business school, but across so many different schools in collaboration with the medical campus and the arts and the Division of Student Affairs and other different places. And that's really the opportunity that's so creative and wonderful. But looking at drawing a thread through curriculum so that we don't have standalone classes in our higher educational experiences, but a true purpose for each program, and then common threads of content, of experience, of engagement that allow that to come to fruition. In our work with the Humanistic Leadership Academy, including VCU and Barry-Wehmiller, we look at the importance of knowing, doing, and being. And too often in educational environments of all kinds, we focus on the knowing. More and more in our world today, that knowledge is at our fingertips, whether it's the internet or AI or other different elements. It's important, but it's so much more accessible than it was in past generations. The opportunity is to have really engaging experiences that hit that doing, and then really integrated environments that allow people to work on their being. And that's what I see already happening at VCU, and what I see so much potential for collaboration moving forward, whether that's within MBA programs, whether that's supporting more faculty interaction to support research, or training leaders of student workers across the campus. The sky is the limit. And I think there's already so much going on at VCU, but I think you'll see more and more universities and professors and forward-thinking people in leadership coming to VCU over the next years, wanting to better understand the special things that are happening there.
Chris, what are you seeing from the students? What are you hearing from the students in terms of their reaction to this collaboration, what they're seeing from the Institute and what they're seeing from what Barry-Wehmiller is bringing to the table?
As I mentioned previously, some of these ideas and concepts that we're collectively teaching, this idea of the world being a better place if we care a bit more deeply and we spend more time connecting than we do sort of managing tasks. These ideas in themselves are not new, or perhaps they're not even surprising. I think if we think about them deeply, and as the students think about them deeply throughout the courses that they take, it makes sense. And yet it's so hard to do. And it's a challenge I've had with mindfulness research for many years now. We all know that we should be focused more, in the present moment. And yet we often let our mind go somewhere else. And in that somewhere else, we're often anxious and nervous and fearful and don't respond well to change. And so what I hear the students reiterate, and it's so powerful. We just had Bob Chapman be a guest speaker in my evening MBA class. And what the students said afterward was really powerful. And they said, Bob said a lot of amazing things, and we wrote down a lot of things, and we were shaped so deeply by what he said. And yet what really stuck with students is that leaders who advocate for and actually put into practice this more caring and compassionate way can actually make a difference and make it happen. And so, in other words, these ideas are simple. Putting them into practice is simple, but none of us actually believe that we can do it and it's actually going to make a change. But what Barry-Wehmiller, through Bob's discussion, helped the students realize is that it really is as easy and as possible as enacting it moment to moment and looking at how to make a change and then making it better. And so it's this practice, it's this journey, it's this lifelong journey toward more care and compassion, and that leadership makes a huge difference. And so the students just remarked at the simplicity and yet the empowerment that they felt when hearing from a leader who had done this, who had talked about this for many years and could also tell the story about how the organization runs based in this very humanistic way and the difference it makes. Because oftentimes we sort of know what's right and we know what we want to move toward, but we don't have as many clear, powerful, compelling examples of it actually happening day to day. And so that's what I'm hearing from students. And to expand the question a little bit, in collaboration with Barry-Wehmiller, the Institute for Transformative Leadership is creating now a second complete set of cohorts of faculty, staff, and administrators from across the VCU enterprise are invited into Friday virtual sessions, which is basically a practice group. How do we think about bringing more care and accountability to our classrooms, to our teams, to our world? And how do we balance these ideas that are really not either or, but both and? We have to perform well and care deeply for people. And so just to highlight that thread that is so powerful to me with this collaboration is that you provide an example and real life proof that this performance and people and harmony works, and yet also provide the skills and the capacity building in partnership with ITL to help leaders actually make the decisions day in and day out to bring about this more caring and compassionate leadership. So, while your question was about students, and I took that to mean sort of students in the classroom, I think the way that ITL considers leadership is that we're all students at all times and all places trying to perfect this art and science of doing better with people in deep care. And so in that respect, we're sort of working on it each day, and Barry-Wehmiller provides structure and resources and time set aside each Friday to actually help us practice those skills.
That's a great point that you bring that up, Chris, because it also kind of speaks to the work that you and Brian both are doing with the Humanistic Leadership Academy. And Brian, if you could speak to this a little bit, how does your guys' work in VCU align and inform the work of the Humanistic Leadership Academy?
Well, I think innovation and creativity are so important. And that's where we need universities actually practicing some of these things, trying new ideas, but we also need networks that work across universities. And one of the things that I've been astounded by in a very positive way is how many networks exist amongst the academy of professors and researchers engaging with one another across universities. As somebody from industry, it's much less common to work across multiple companies within an industry. Yeah, maybe there's an annual association meeting or something, but professors are regularly collaborating. And the Humanistic Leadership Academy is really holding that space for conversation, where professors, schools that are working with some of these ideas can be rejuvenated, can be connected with others, can be challenged by others along the way. And so I think a great aspect of that is Chris was part of Cohort 0 in the Humanistic Leadership Academy, creating this cohort opportunity for professors to engage in some of these topics for 7 or 8 sessions with one another and challenge each other and support one another along the way. As Chris mentioned, we brought that methodology in alignment with the Humanistic Leadership Academy to host specific cohort sessions for people across VCU's campus. And that's been tremendous to leverage value that was created from the network to come up with some new approaches and ideas that have been very life-giving at VCU. And then there's going to be a conference this June where we can share some of the latest updates that can be shared back with the larger network to encourage other people along the way. And so I think the Humanistic Leadership Academy does a great job sponsoring webinars and some cohorts and conferences that allow like-minded professors like Chris to collaborate outside of their internal university network and empowers those people within their university network to make real and lasting change on a local level where they are. So it's kind of think globally and act locally, I think, is a key part of that alignment between the Humanistic Leadership Academy, Barry-Wehmiller, and universities like VCU.
This collaboration that you guys have been involved in, what do you see for it in the future? How is it going to amplify each of your individual efforts going forward?
Well, I think any great partnership is founded in mutual benefit. And so one of the key things that we see in Barry-Wehmiller is we are very proud of our historic focus on leadership and leadership development, but we always want to be looking for those ideas at the forefront of thinking in this area. And that's what collaborations with many academics, but Chris in particular, provide to us. Just last week, we were looking at tweaking our historic Listen Like a Leader class, which I think more than 30,000 people have taken around the world inside and outside Barry-Wehmiller. We're looking to amplify the focus on empathy and its connection to listening. And as a foremost expert on empathy and mindfulness and such things, Chris had a great collaborative conversation with us. So I think part of the continued benefit will be taking ideas from Chris and his colleagues at VCU and incorporating back into some of the offerings that we have and the culture that we create inside Barry-Wehmiller. I think a second thing is to continue to build out not just one workshop or one speech, but actual curriculum. I mentioned that thread before, that thread that can be drawn through multiple courses or multiple experiences or multiple class sessions. And Chris and I are working on some of those opportunities right now, doing something through an MBA program or through an undergraduate program or through a special certification or badge that could be multiple sessions with one cohort, but with a common theme. And then I think the ultimate opportunity is to differentiate VCU, and certainly we're mindful that we work with multiple different campuses, but VCU is such a deep partner with us, that differentiate VCU as a place where you can find an urban leadership-based integrated experience where you can maximize your growth, not just in your knowledge, not just as a professional, but a holistic person along the way. We are already taking steps in that direction, but to really differentiate that, show the benefit to employers, to graduates and alumni, to the surrounding area, and then continue to build, I think, a hub mentality of how that can be shared with more and more people, not only in the Virginia area, but with universities across the country and around the world.
Brian, I'll pick up on the last comment you made because it's sitting with me deeply as well. This idea of what we can accomplish and what we're already accomplishing together, but this idea that together we can augment the shared message and that we could impact, idealistically, but I think this will actually happen and is happening, but we can actually implement this work in all areas of society, whether that's ultimately K through 12 education, because many of the conversations that we've had, illuminate that, it's problematic that as adults we're having to learn to live deeply into compassion and care. What if we started earlier and we worked in the K through 12 classrooms? And so this sort of education model itself we can work on together in a way that benefits VCU, in a way that benefits Barry-Wehmiller. And if we think about physicians and physician-nurse collaborations and how they face patients, right? I mean, we can really think about taking our shared models and our approaches, and we can help infuse that into so many corners of our society that, as Bob Chapman says, are perhaps broken, are not working as well as they could. And so what gets me the most excited is not additive impact. It's not sort of 1 + 1, but it's really this model of like together we're 3 and then we're squaring that and it's 9, to be silly in an example with math. But it's this idea of together there's so much that can be done across society. That idea sticks with me, and indeed we're well on our way of making those types of impact. I'd also like to see in the future that we continue the same message that I think Bob shared with my class, or at least the takeaway that the class had with Bob. And it's, how do we collectively in this partnership continue to help others live into being human more deeply every day? And so the message, I mean, it's a constant discussion that I have with folks. It's almost like, they got to learn something new. They got to, it's a new framework. And yes, we're full of frameworks, but it's really, if we just trust the process and live into being more human and giving each other more spaces to connect, so many of the challenges go away. And so maybe it's a nice way to end, but it's this idea and hope that I have that through this partnership we'll continue to help others understand and live into just how simple this idea is. And that doesn't mean it's simple to pull off, but together with our collective wisdom and passion and resources, we can be a force that gets us over that inflection point, perhaps as a nation, as a world, where we do live into more deep connections and compassionate care for each other, and focus much more on what we have in common than what we have different. And if we do that, and we believe that, and we remove these illusions of separation that we have, that's a core fundamental building block of transformative leadership. If we move toward truly embracing each other and not division and not segmentation, then I think that's a really amazing spot for our world, for our education system, for our medical system, for our organizations to embrace. And so that's, I think, as Brian said, sky's the limit. And I think living into that truth of us all being deeply connected, that's one of the most amazing things that this partnership can help others understand.
Find out more about the Institute for Transformative Learning at business.vcu.edu. You can learn learn more about the Humanistic Leadership Academy and its offerings, and sign their manifesto at humanisticleadershipacademy.org. And don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads at Barry-Wehmiller, and find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.